Well, hello everyone. My name is Ryan Minook, and I am a senior platform evangelist for Claris. I'm joined by Todd Geist, who is the owner of Claris Platinum partner Geist Interactive. Todd and his team have been key partners and leaders in the community for many, many years, and he is here today to highlight how JavaScript can help power up those modern custom apps that you've been building in Claris FileMaker. Before we dive in, a few brief housekeeping notes. Now, we hope you have a great experience in today's webinar, but if you run into any technical issues with GoToWebinar, please contact technical support at 1-833-851-8340. If you're outside of the US, please call 0-800-031-4760. During today's presentation, you'll have the opportunity to type in and ask questions. So go to the control panel, click on that question section, enter your question, and then click on send. And we're going to try to cover as many questions as time allows at the end of our presentation. But remember, you don't need to wait until the end to ask a question. So Claris offers the ideal path to deliver modern custom apps that your clients demand using a platform that you already know. And with Claris FileMaker, you can rapidly build those custom apps that businesses need but they just can't find anywhere, while even using advanced tech that matters like cloud, mobile, and AI. Now recently, we released Claris FileMaker 19, our first open platform heralding a brand new way to build your modern apps. So you could snap together your apps with shareable add-ons or extend innovation through AI or through JavaScript, one of the most popular programming languages and our focus for today. So with that, let me hand the presentation over to Todd Geist.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction. And I'm so excited to be here. Thanks very much to Claris for putting this on. This really does represent a breakthrough in the FileMaker platform and the Claris FileMaker platform. And I'm super excited to start to get to play with some of these new tools. So I want to start by talking about what's important about being open. So when I think about an open platform, I think about the ability of developers to get in there and actually change it so that we can change the experience that we as developers have or also that users have by adding bundles of code that do things that aren't available within the native platform itself. And this allows us to build modules, essentially. We're calling them add-ons now, but modules is the same kind of idea, just a bundle of code that can be easily installed and uninstalled and that sort of thing from your system. And I've been thinking about this for quite some time. We launched modularfilemaker.org, a website, back a number of years ago now, talking about this concept of how to think about building our applications in a more modular way. And now we're getting some tools within the platform itself that make this easier. And this allows us to use other people's work. So this is all about leverage. It's about not having to build everything from scratch. It's about being able to go out and get working code from people who've thought a lot about solving the problem in that particular domain space, and just being able to pull that in, like a calendar, for example. I really don't want to have to know about leap years and date math and all of those things. I just want to be able to use a calendar in my application. Open platform to me is all about. And in terms of the other things as well, there's the machine learning and other things that we're not going to cover here. Today, we're going to cover JavaScript and how it fits into this. So first of all, an introduction on JavaScript. JavaScript is the most popular programming language on the planet. Millions of developers around the world. The resources are extreme, everything from training and blog posts and examples to the free and commercial libraries available all over the internet, including from the main repository, NPM, which has 1.3 million packages hosted on it. And those packages are downloaded 20 billion times per week, which is just an insane amount of activity in this ecosystem, which is what's so exciting about it. The other thing about JavaScript is that it actually runs everywhere. So it runs on browsers, on desktops, servers, and little IoT devices, and now it runs really, really well in FileMaker. We've got a couple of things added to this release that make it much better than it's ever been before in terms of using this stuff within FileMaker. So we're going to take a quick little tour of about a half a dozen JavaScript libraries integrated in FileMaker so we can get a sense of what that looks like. But I do want to just start by saying that there's really just about any kind of user interface that you can imagine or that you've ever seen has been built in JavaScript. And so on the left of this slide, you're seeing just a bunch of examples of the kind of things that you can find out there. Everything from free stuff to UI kits and dashboards and pre-designed stuff that you can buy. And we're going to take a look at about 6 of these. All right, there we go. So I've just brought up this calendar. You can see it's day, week, and month view calendar, right? Pretty common. We get the nice drag and drop stuff here that works really well. What's really nice about this is when I double click, I'm now getting a card window that pops over on top of the web viewer. So below here is a web viewer that is running my JavaScript application. And in this case, it's an example of Full Calendar, which is a very popular calendar library that's available and relatively easy to do integrations with. So that's pretty neat. All right, so here's Kanban. So this is one of these great drag and drop kind of experiences where you can get you can move things from column to column. You can resort them, which is pretty neat. Next one we're going to look at is, let's look at a photo editor. So here's a little photo gallery that we have. I can click on a photo and bring it up within the editor. And once it's there, I can do things like add sepia tones, or I can crop it to just maybe the section that I'm interested in. Apply that crop, and I can save that. So you can do a lot to this. You can also draw on top of. You can do drawing on top of these, which is kind of nice. And when you save, you're getting those right back into the container field. So cropping, rotating, you can do all kinds of things here. Rotate. And you can do, so cropping, rotating, editing, great. We're going to look at data tables. So data tables is a grid library, very popular, and it kind of it produces what looks like a FileMaker portal, except we can do things like drag the columns around, right? Which is pretty neat. We can also sort on those columns, up and down, back and forth, things like that. We're going to take a look at this later. This is going to be the example that we look at about building these integrations. That's data tables. So PSP PDF Kit. So this is a commercial library, and this is just an example of some of the things that are available commercially out there. And for certain types of projects, getting commercially supported libraries is actually really useful because they're really challenging. So and PDF annotation and PDF editing is one of those things that's really, really challenging. So you'll find some free stuff out there, but it won't be as good as what you'll get if you pay for it. And so PS PDF Kit was kind enough to give me a license to demo this for you all. So let me show you what you can do. You've got, this is just FileMaker stuff. I'm just displaying different PDFs in a container field here. But when I want to annotate, I can go in and open these things up in a browser window. I'm sorry, in the PSP PDF Kit editor. And now I can start to do things like highlight and, put lines in. I can also do signature capture. So if I want to sign something, I can add my signature, and then you can place it on the line, for example. Right. And things like that. So let's save that one, and we'll see. We can get that now into our app. Let's take a look at another one. So so here's just a sample PDF. It's got an extra page I don't care about. So let me just get rid of that, which I can do. I can go into edit here, and I can get this page and just delete it. Right here, delete the page, save it. And then we'll just use freeform highlight, and you can see how you can highlight a section of the thing. You can also do annotations that can be stored in the database, like what is this section about? So like a note for somebody, or something that can be pulled out of the database, pulled out of the file later. And of course, we can save all that back to the PDF itself, like that. Okay, so the next one I want to look at is Apex Chart. So this one is really cool. It actually responds to the theme or the mode of my operating system. So I've got my appearance here, control panel up, and system preferences, and I set the dark mode now. If I switch to light mode, notice the FileMaker Chrome changes, right? But so does the whole web interface itself, right? So it's actually the web interface is listening, along with FileMaker is listening to the changes and updating its UI. In response to that, this web app can do that as well. So this little JavaScript application that we built using Apex Charts can do that as well. So another interesting thing about this is, so this is pulling from FileMaker data, obviously, but I can also do things like I can tell the application to change in response to a FileMaker script. So in this case, this is actually a card window, and this is just a button bar that's been laid out on top of some color palettes. And when I pick a color palette, I can tell the application underneath it that, hey, I've chosen a different theme, a different color palette, so go ahead and update yourself. So that's what you're seeing here, is this ability to call into the web application without, and notice again, without there being any refresh or anything, the colors just update, right? The whole page doesn't redraw, the colors just update. So this is one of my favorite ones, because it's just so rich in terms of what we can build with it. We got these popovers, we can see we're looking at sales, visits, and downloads on a website, and we can really drill in and see all the different things here. It's an example of a full dashboard that we built using JavaScript. Super cool library, Apex Charts. Definitely worth checking out. All right, so let's get into how it works. So it's great. I hope by now you're getting the idea of how powerful it is to be able to add some of these libraries to your FileMaker application. And so now let's talk a little bit about how it actually works under the hood. How do we make this work? So first, let's talk about a couple of new script steps. We have perform JavaScript on web viewer, and this is the script step that allows us to call into the JavaScript app running in our web viewer. So the JavaScript apps are running in web viewers, if that wasn't clear before. And this script step allows us to tell that web app to do something. So we can run a script in there. It's called a function, and we'll look at that in a minute. But that's what that is. The second script step that's very useful is execute FileMaker Data API. And this makes it easy to get FileMaker data into your little applications. Finally, we have anytime JavaScript is running within a FileMaker web viewer, FileMaker adds an object to JavaScript, a global object called FileMaker, and on that object is a perform script method. And when you call that method, you pass it a name and a parameter, and that will send the message back to FileMaker. So what this gives us is a two-way communication channel between our FileMaker web app, our FileMaker application, and the web application that we have running inside of a web viewer. We can call in with perform JavaScript on web viewer. We call a function which is declared inside of our JavaScript. And then we can call out using that FileMaker perform script, that FileMaker.perform script method that will enable us to call out to FileMaker and tell it to do something in response to activity that's going on within the application. Execute Data API, super awesome feature. Really excited to get this because it lets us query data using a very flexible query syntax, which is pretty much identical to the one that's available through the REST API on FileMaker Server. But this one doesn't require server. There's no additional login. So any of the privileges so it uses the privileges of the currently signed in user. So no server required. It will use the privileges of the currently signed in user. Doesn't go through the HTTP server, doesn't go through the REST API, and does not count towards your data API quota. So that's really nice. So how do you deploy your JavaScript libraries in FileMaker? So where do you put the code? Well, you can put the code in a number of places, but let's start at the sort of high level. You could build a web app, a website, and just use a normal URL and put it into the calc dialog of the web viewer, and that will work just fine. You can also build a data URI, which is what you can see the syntax for in the bottom right there. And that is a way of calculating the HTML page that you would like to display. And so you can store the HTML in a number of places in FileMaker. You could use inserts, you could use script steps, you could use layout objects, you can use fields. It doesn't really matter. The key thing is that you can use any storage space within FileMaker to calculate up and then calculate up the HTML that you want to display in the web viewer and then display it. So that's kind of the two things, served versus embedded. There actually is a hybrid. You can have an embedded data URI that uses served assets, and that's actually super common. And we'll look at that in just a second. All right, so back to data table. So here we're going to do this kind of hybrid thing I talked about. And so let's start by just taking a quick look at what we're dealing with here in this little application. I'm going to layout mode. We've got our web viewer here. And so we're using the data URL, the data URI methodology, the embedded methodology to calculate the HTML that we want to use here. And we're building it from basically two fields. So we've got an HTML field that has kind of the wrapper or the core bits of all the HTML and CSS and JavaScript that we need. And then we're going to have a little bit of JavaScript stored in the datatables.js field that we're going to merge into this HTML. So we're taking the data::text HTML, and that's what you have to begin this with. And then we're going to build the HTML we want to display from two fields. So let's take a look at those. So here's the first field, and this is all there is to it. The stuff in the top here in the head is broken up into a couple different sections. But the first part, this part I'm highlighting there now, is all of the things that we are loading off of CDNs or stuff that's freely available on the internet and that you can just link to and use within your application. Now, these won't work. This will not work offline. You would have to bring all of this code into your HTML calculation to do that. And you can do that, and we do that as well. But in this case, we're pulling these assets in off of the internet. So these are the sort of dependencies that we're bringing into the app, not the code that we have to write to make this work. Down here, we've got that merge token that we saw before in the calculation, and that is where we're going to insert the JavaScript that is actually part of the integration. So it actually controls the integration or does what we need to do to pull this all off. And that's what we're looking at here. We're adding a function to the window, the global namespace. So window is, you can kind of think about it like the space for $$ FileMaker variables. It's like it's the place that you can hook variables on that are available throughout the application, throughout the whole web page, and also where they have to be available to be called by that new script step, perform JavaScript on web viewer. So that is what we're doing here. We're creating a function called load data. And that function is going to get some JSON from our FileMaker file, and it's going to parse it because remember, JSON coming from a FileMaker file is a string. So we have to parse it into an object, a JavaScript object. And then we're going to use that data, use that object to pull out the column so that we'll see what the data looks like. But we're first going to, basically what we're doing here is just creating the column headers. That's these guys here. We're finding those based on what's actually in that JSON payload. And then right here is where we're actually saying to the library, hey, make me a data table. So we're creating that data table with this data table function with jQueries. This is a jQuery library, base library. It says, hey, jQuery, make a data table, and here's all the options I want you to use. So I want you to paging off, you're searching false. There's I don't know, dozens of options that you can put in here. And this looks a lot like JSON, but it's actually JavaScript in this case. There's no quotes around the keys, but it could be JSON. It wouldn't actually matter. So you could actually pass in these options as well. at least some of them, to the web viewer from FileMaker if you wanted to. But that's it. That's going to create that. That's going to create the data table. And it's going to take the columns we got, and it's going to take the data we got, and it's going to insert it into you can see there's columns being added and there's data being added. And that's really all there is to it. And then this part down here is adding the double click to the row event. So when I double click on a row in the data tables, I want it to actually show a FileMaker card window that has that data in it. So that's what that's doing there. And we're simply using jQuery to select the right element. We're adding a double click, and we're grabbing the data from that row. We're stringifying it because we want to send it back to FileMaker, and then we are again calling off the window variable FileMaker perform script. So that's what that is doing. And we're calling a script on double click row, and we're giving it that JSON. Okay. So this is the custom piece. Like, this is all we have to write to get this behavior. So we load the data, and when I double click on a row, we get a card window popping up with that happening. So you can see there's not actually much JavaScript to write, and it's relatively straightforward JavaScript using jQuery to pull this off. Once you understand, most of this is just copy and pasted from the documentation for data tables. In fact, almost all of it. Just this, I added a few extra styles to the web page, so it would look a little bit different. But that's it. I mean, everything else is just copy and paste, and then I write a little bit of JavaScript, most of which again I copied and pasted out of the instructions, and now I've got this beautiful integration here that gives me power that I didn't have before. So I want to look at one more thing, which is when we're loading the data, what is getting passed in and what is getting passed out when we run it. So I'm going to turn on debugger and data tape and the data viewer here, and let's load the data. So we're going to run that script. So first thing I'm doing is I'm building the data API request. And there's a bunch of options that you can set here, but really we're only setting a couple. And I'm going to go through the script in a minute, but I want to show you the result of this call. So then we're going to call that data API. We're going to parse out little bits of data, and we're going to send it to the web viewer. So let's just see what that data looks like. So once I call the data API with my request, the result appears in the result variable. And then I go through messages and the JSON to send. And you can see over here, the messages is where errors would be. So if I was going to build an error trapping, I would use the messages part of that result, which I'm parsing out right there, to look and see if there's any errors. There aren't. The code is 0. And then this is the JSON I want to send. And that is really so that's all of the record data. Now, we're basing this off of a layout, which is important to know. The data API, the exec data API, works exactly the same as the REST one from the server. So you need a layout to call that, to basically use to get all the fields back on it. And then we're just sending it to the web viewer, and that's pretty much it. That loads it. Now, when we call out, and turn on debugger again, and when I double click on, let's double click on this one right here. See, we're going to get a script gets fired on double click. That's from our JavaScript we looked at. And let's look at that record, what gets passed out. I think I might have a version of that already formatted. No, I don't, but let's format that real quick. And let's look at what that looks like. So that's the field data coming out of the web viewer. And you see it has all of the data in it that was in that row, right? So there's Amershire and there's the rest of it, including the ID. So all this script is doing is it is running through here, grabs the ID. Now it opens a new card window, performs a find using that ID, and that's it. That's all it is. Now, before we leave this demo, I want to just go back to the data API and talk just briefly about this to look at the setup here. So when I'm making a data API request, I'm constructing JSON. All right. So JSON is the format that we're sending to the exact same parsing engine and the same formatting engine that the REST API uses. We're just not going through the the FileMaker server-based REST API. So we construct a little bit of JSON where we target the layout. I know it says layouts. That is an unfortunate sort of naming thing we have right now. We'll see if we can get that fixed in a later version because it's really just one layout. And then we're setting it a limit. So I'm just saying, give me 500 records. I don't care about more than that for this demo. We're just getting 500 records. But you can also, using the documentation, which we'll link to, plus the REST API that's already documented, you can do things like queries. So you can do very complex finds. You can do sorts. You can get portal row data. You can do all the things you can do with the data API by constructing a little bit of JSON, which is what I'm doing here. All right, and then we're sending that through the execute data API. And you can see that here I've got the data API request, and that's what I'm calling there. And then I'm targeting the result. And that's what we're doing there. And the rest is what we talked about already. We're going to get our messages, and we're going to get our JSON we want to send to the web viewer, and then we're going to send that to the web viewer. All right, so I think we're done with that. Let me go back to the presentation. So now, this is super important and super, super cool. So it's really great that you can do all this stuff with JavaScript and you can make all these things work. But even if you don't want to learn JavaScript, you can get the benefits of having JavaScript in your application without having to even see any JavaScript code. So this is the concept of an add-on, which are in preview right now and are coming soon to Marketplace. And they allow drag and drop install of pre-built bundles of FileMaker code. Now, it's important to understand that add-ons and JavaScript are not one-to-one. You can make an add-on with anything, any FileMaker objects, including web viewers, which means you can use JavaScript inside of them. But there are examples of add-ons that aren't using JavaScript at all. So they're not equivalent. But an add-on gives you the ability to use these without having to do much of anything. All right, so for this little add-on demo, I've got a simple appointments database here. I've got a list of appointments using a master detail view here. But I'd also like a calendar, and I don't want to make one in JavaScript. So let me just look at the file here a little bit. We've got some layouts, and I've prepared this layout to be the one that I navigate to when I click on the calendar. So I've got that set. There's only a couple of tables in here. My appointments table is the only one of note. And just got one script for closing the card on that detail window I just showed. So let's go ahead and drop into layout mode, and let's go to the add-ons tab, and let's look and see what I got. Now I have a few add-ons installed here. And I've got the editor, I've got a calendar and a Kanban board. These are JavaScript ones. These are not built with JavaScript. I'm going to choose calendar. And we're going to install that into the system. Let me go to my calendar layout real quick. And now I'm just going to drag this out. And I'm just going to, in the interest of time, just make some rough adjustments to the size of this so it sizes up nice and neat. And there we go. We've got our calendar. Now, you notice in the database, we've got this table came in, sample events, that came in as part of that install. And it includes the sample data. So that's what we're actually seeing here. It's not the data from my appointments, just the sample data. So I want to change that. So I click on Configurator. I move to my appointment card, the one I set up for this. And I choose all of the fields that I want to work here. So we've got start date. Oh, I need to make sure that's a start date and a start time and a end date and an end time. And we'll pick a couple optional fields. We'll choose is all day, and editable will be unlocked. That's good enough. So now this is actually using the data from my sample table. Not my sample table, sorry. It's using the appointments table, and it's using the card that I configured so that if I click on any of these, we're going to get that card window. So that's it. I set up a basic configuration between an appointments table that I had in my file and the calendar, which is a JavaScript-based add-on, but I never even saw JavaScript anywhere. So that's the power of add-ons, and that's what makes them super exciting. even if you don't want to use JavaScript or learn JavaScript, you'll be able to use add-ons to power your FileMaker apps with JavaScript. So I want to show one more thing because I think this point is super important, and I think kind of seals the whole deal for me. So since FileMaker 16, we've had the ability to integrate with other applications like calendars and Kanban boards and all these things. And these are great. Right? It's really nice to be able to do that. And it's super powerful and a critical aspect of being an open platform and of being an application development platform in today's world, because you just need to integrate. So very, very important. But now that we have the ability to bring in things like, say, instead of integrating with a calendar, we can actually bring a calendar into our application. We get a couple more benefits, which I think are really important. So let's take a look at what those are. Here's something that you can't do with your Outlook calendar. So let's say this incredible plastic hat appointment wants to reschedule, and I say, all right, well, let's do it on July 4th. You can't add appointments to this date. The office is closed. Your change will be reverted. And the data is not saved to the database. And the change is just not there. So I call this validation, or getting in the middle of these applications. If you're doing an integration, you might be able to then, after you've done a sync with the calendar, say, oh, this is actually a date that we can't use, so then send a change back. But this is actually much cleaner to be able to get in right into the middle of this and say, hey, man, you're not allowed to put appointments on this date. So this is just FileMaker logic. So I'm not having to go into the JavaScript to do this. I created a special script that will validate on the event dropped. So whenever we drag an event and drop it, most days it's gonna allow that because that's not July 4th. But if I move it over here, nope, can't do it. I've returned that validation capability back to the FileMaker developer. And so I can provide a script here where they can write their own logic and do any kind of FileMaker logic you can think of. You could make it based on privilege set. You could make it based on user. You could make it based on specific time blocks throughout the day. In this case, I'm just saying, get his date with the new start date. So the new start date is passed in when I drop the calendar, the event on the calendar. That script that gets fired eventually will pass the data for that new event to the script. I can parse out the new start time, new start date, end time, end date. I can do whatever I want to that. And in this case, I'm just simply saying, if the date is July 4th, show a dialog and exit with false. So if I exit the script with false, this will stop the edit from being accepted. So that is pretty powerful. And the other thing that I think really can't overstate is that, again, this is now the event display, this layout. What you see when you double click on this is a FileMaker layout. So you can change that and do whatever you like to that. Maybe you just simply wanted to rearrange the way that it looks. Maybe you wanted to put the start date and end date. Let's just do this real quick. We'll move this up. Maybe you just wanted, maybe this was more important to you, is to put this like that. Maybe that's all you wanted, right? You have complete control over this because it's a FileMaker layout. That change has been saved. I come back here. I click on this, and there we go. I can do whatever I want to this layout because it is not, let's say the Outlook calendar or the Gmail's Google Calendar. It's my FileMaker layout, and I can do whatever I want. So the power of validating the business logic and the power of the UI is still in the hands of the FileMaker developer. So to me, this is pretty important because it lets us integrate when we need to services where maybe we don't need to worry about custom business logic or custom UI. We could still do all that integration. We've had that power now really since FileMaker 16. But now with FileMaker 19 in the open platform, I can bring those interfaces into my application, and I can apply my own business logic and my own UI to those interfaces, to those applications. And that to me is just a huge win. Yeah, so that's it. So here's some next steps for you. We've got a bunch of information on our website. All of the resources around the libraries that we used are here. We've also got a training file that Jeremy Brown put together that goes through a whole bunch of like JavaScript exercises with FileMaker. So you're working within FileMaker to use JavaScript and to build integrations. Here's a couple links to some training sites that I found pretty useful. And then, of course, the Claris Academy is available. So lots of good resources and links to those are available there and also on our website. And I think we are ready for Q&A.
Thanks, Todd. And really, what wonderful and practical examples that you've shared with us today to really highlight the potential of a powered up modern FileMaker app through JavaScript. Okay, it's Q&A time. So as a reminder, click on the question section of your GoToMeeting console, enter that question and click on send. We have a lot of questions, so give us 1 second to get your questions sorted out and then we'll get started. All right, Todd, to start off, building or using JavaScript in Mac and Windows, are there anything in particular that we would need to look out for, or any best practices or gotchas when developing on those different platforms?
Yes, there sure are. So the first thing to know is that the Windows web browser that is used inside the web viewer is Internet Explorer 11 for the time being. That is something that Claris is working on, hopefully switching at some point soon. That browser's been deprecated by even Microsoft now, so it's on its way out. But for today, as of right now, that's what we have to deal with. And so it is not. It's a little behind. So you have to use older style JavaScript than what you might see out there. What most people do once you get a little bit into this is you start doing what's called transpilation. I can't get into the details of this, but if you're using any of the modern front end frameworks like React or Svelte or Angular or Vue, any of those, they're going to do this for you. And so the ability to take the JavaScript that you're writing and turn it into JavaScript that can run in IE 11 is pretty much handled. You just have to have the right tooling in place, and again, it's pretty standard in most of the frameworks that are out there. Um, the other thing is you don't have a debugger on Windows, so you can't get into the inspector, the web inspector on Windows. So that is a little bit of a challenge. You have to use alerts or other techniques to kind of be able to debug what you're doing there. So typically what we do is we'll do the main bulk of the work on a Mac where you can get into the inspector and you can actually get a little help with doing some of those things. And then we test it inside of IE11. And if we're doing transpilation or if we're careful about using just older JavaScript techniques, it's really not a problem. But definitely something you do have to be aware of for the time being.
Perfect. So we have some people who are really interested in diving into JavaScript, but um, they haven't really experienced or gone into JavaScript that much prior. So they just want to know realistically, how much time would you say we should dedicate to learning this new language?
Well, I would say again, I think if it's something that interests you, then you should definitely do it. I think there's a lot of benefits just from understanding JavaScript, just because it plays such an important role in the broader ecosystem that FileMaker is a part of, which is building information systems. Really, we make applications that send data around and process data and display data, and JavaScript is playing a bigger and bigger role in that problem domain every year. So it's good. It's good to have an understanding of that. I think I would let your interest drive you. Like I hope I made the point with add-ons is that if this is not something that interests you or you're not that curious about it, people will develop these add-ons and you'll be able to use them without having to learn JavaScript. But if you're interested, dive in. And it's really hard to say a percentage of time. I think everybody's got their own levels of interest, their own life scenarios, whatever. But I think I probably spent, I would have to say, I don't know, in the last, like say 5 to 10 years of looking at these kinds of technologies, I've always, and not just JavaScript, but anything new, I've just always kind of had this idea that I needed to spend about 10 to 20% of my time in my career dedicated on forward-looking technologies. And so I would say that's a good benchmark that you probably want to be spending some time doing this. And you just got to kind of think of it as professional development. It's really sort of I mean, it's just so much happening these days. It's really helpful to have some time set aside to go after these things. But I would definitely base it on your interests. Like, find if you want interested in JavaScript, find a library that really interests you, Apex charts, full calendar, whatever, and really dive into that. Data tables, really dive into that. Let that be the thing that kind of pulls you along into the rest of the things. At least that's what works for me, is to kind of have something that I just get excited about, and I can just keep diving in.
And to piggyback on that, in terms of the resources, can you give us a reminder of where we can access Jeremy's sample file?
Yeah, so on the screen that's still up, that fm-js link, the very first one, that leads to our kind of our summary page for this webinar. And so that's going to have links to all of the libraries that we showed, all the ones there, um, from PSP PDF Kit to data tables and everything in between are there, plus links to all the other blog posts and training files that we've done over the last several years are on that page, and a link to Jeremy's training file is there as well. So that's really like your next step, probably, is to hit that link, go through the resources. There's probably 24 or more resources linked on that page to get you started. Not just from us, from other people who do in the FileMaker community who've done stuff like how do you turn on the web inspector in Safari. There's a blog post by Beeswax that covers that, and we link to that there, so you can go find that link and go check out how to turn that on. So yeah, that's the first place to look.
Awesome. So we have some questions about the JavaScript on the different FileMaker client technologies. Are there
Yeah.
any best practices when designing for Pro or FileMaker Go or WebDirect?
Yeah, so WebDirect, it's going to work. There's some minor changes just in kind of behavior in terms of the number of refreshes you might see. And again, this is still very new, and FileMaker is working on this. Claris is working on this. But there's just some issues there. It's you want to avoid in WebDirect. People shouldn't be using IE11 period in WebDirect. They should be sticking with Chrome on Windows, Safari on Mac, or Chrome on Mac. So you want to be people need to be using those modern browsers for really anything, frankly. And so, but mostly it works. The card windows pop up over the top of the web viewers, which was a huge thing that we got fit into this release. This ability to have this interleaving of a JavaScript application running on a layout, and then to pull a card window over the top of that. And we got card windows in FileMaker 19 on WebDirect here too, and that was a whole part of how this whole thing came together. It just gives this really nice integration where parts of the application can be left at a FileMaker developer, and whereas the UI, the calendar, the Kanban board, or whatever, can be left to the JavaScript piece. What else? So, of course, on Go, you have a most of the Go issues are going to be around the size of the screen and the size of the hit targets. So the same things that you're dealing with in a normal FileMaker layout, you're going to deal with here. The other thing is you don't have hovers or those kinds of things on Go. So, UI libraries that depend on hovering a lot aren't going to be great in that case. You do have some nice things on Go, is that some of these libraries are going to be responsive. So if you build a dashboard using responsive web, it'll automatically respond to that on Go. So mostly it's about just dealing with the differences in platforms as opposed to like really dealing with the nitty gritty on the code level.
Great. So the next question we have about the JavaScript calendar that you showed.
Yeah.
Something that we implement a JavaScript calendar. Can you take the data from that and pass it to something like Outlook or Gmail?
So that would be doing a sync or something like that, and you certainly could. We've had that ability really for a long time with plugins, but in FileMaker 16 is where we got the insert from URL and the JSON functions, which make that kind of integration, relatively standard stuff now for FileMaker apps. So that's really not the UI library, although I suppose you could build that integration into the JavaScript if you wanted to, but you've got all of the capabilities within FileMaker script steps to do integrations where you're sending data to Outlook or to Google Calendar or to whatever calendar you want.
So we talked about getting data from JavaScript into FileMaker. We have someone asking about can you return results from a FileMaker script to the JavaScript calling function?
So it's not a direct call. So in other words, when you call performed JavaScript on a web viewer, that script is not going to get a script result by it. That script step isn't going to have a result that you can get directly. What people discover pretty quickly though is that if you make a function that you call with that script, and that function is a synchronous function, and it calls a FileMaker script as its last step, and that script will run immediately, and so you can get the results back right within that initial script flow. So if you're stepping through debugger or if you're just watching the script run, you'll run that script. That script will call the JavaScript function, and immediately the script that it calls, that coming out of the web viewer, will get called. And so it'll have the payload, the result of whatever it is that you wanted. And you can exit the script and then use get script result to do that, to get that result back, or use some other, put it in the field, do whatever you want, and that will work. However, it's one of the things about JavaScript that is you'll find as you get into the more advanced stuff is that it's not always synchronous. In other words, the steps don't always run top to bottom. It's asynchronous. And so what that means is if you have a JavaScript function that is asynchronous, then the FileMaker script step is just going to keep going. It's kind of like using perform script on server and then turning off the wait for result, right? It's just going to keep going, and it's going to run to the end, and then your script will have to come out when that script's over. So yeah, just the difference between synchronous and asynchronous, but that's basically how it works.
Excellent. So we have a lot of people asking about whether add-ons are available right now. They're not, but again, this is the new way we're going to start, building apps, your modern apps. This is a huge priority and a huge part of our strategy. So they're not available right now, but again, we're putting a lot of our resources into this, and it'll be hopefully coming sooner rather than later. We have a lot of questions also about whether this session will be recorded. It is, and you'll receive a link to the recording at the end of this session. I believe we'll also have this popped up on our YouTube channel as well. Todd, do you have any other questions here?
I don't. I actually don't see the questions, so I don't have anything else I was able to see. But let me say something about the add-ons and what their status is right now. So the add-ons are in what FileMaker, or I'm sorry, what Claris calls preview. So they're available to play with. So you can start to learn how to make them and use them. And the documentation for how to do all that, we have all that on our website too as well. Check the blog link. You can see how to start building add-ons. Again, it's in this preview status. And I think this is super important. Also, part of being an open platform is that Claris is now releasing technology that maybe needs more feedback or isn't quite ready to be released in a final form. It needs some refinements. And I think this is awesome because it allows people who are really going to build on top of this in the future to get in there and start to use it and play with it and figure out what works and what doesn't, and give that feedback back to Claris so it can be refined in the future. So you will see, and in fact, there's already at least one prominent third-party vendor, Seed Code, is released their calendar, Dayback calendar, as an add-on. So you can actually download and install it and play with it, and I have, and it works great. It's fantastic. So it's kind of this thing where it's in a preview mode. You need to know that. You need to understand that this is not something you're going to call up FileMaker or Claris support on and say, hey, I need support on this. You're not going to get it. You'll have to go directly to the developer you're working with there. But you definitely, I would encourage people to play with this stuff and to try it out and to see what they can do, because the add-ons also, they don't need to be, as I hope I made clear, They don't need to be JavaScript. They can be any bundle of FileMaker code that you want to share in this way. You can do that way. So just want to make sure that's clear.
Perfect. Great clarification. The script sets are available for you to play with, build with. Those pre-built ones are ones that should be coming down the pipeline soon.
Yep.
All right. On behalf of Todd and Claris, it was our absolute pleasure chatting with everyone today. Definitely hope that you learned something that you can start applying to your own solutions, or it stoked the fire for you to start diving into JavaScript as well. But with that, have a fantastic rest of your day, and we hope to see you on another webinar soon.
Thanks very much.